This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by the Natural Gas Supply Association. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the USEA Power Sector Podcast, we're going to talk with Jason Schendle, principal with the Alpine Group, a powerhouse DC multi-sector lobbying firm. Jason's going to describe the areas in the power sector his group is focused on at this politically charged moment of transition for energy policy. Before joining the Alpine Group, Jason was a DC representative with the American Petroleum Institute and spent almost 9 years as the Energy, Environment, and Agriculture Advisor to Louisiana Democrat Senator Mary Landrieu. Along the way, he worked on the IRA, the 2020 Energy Policy Bill, the American Clean Energy and Security Act of 2009, the Energy Policy Act of 2007, and the landmark Energy Policy Act of 2005. So, Jason, let's begin with a little bit about the Alpine Group. What does the group represent? What's its history? What's its mission?
The Alpine Group formed in 1996, so almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
It really started by four guys who had worked for members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. So they sort of started off with the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee, which I don't know how closely you follow the committee, but one of the former chairmen, John Dingell from Michigan, had a picture of the earth behind him, and he said, "This is the committee's jurisdiction." There was a energy kind of component to that. There was a healthcare component to that, and there was a telecom component to that. And so those were kind of the cornerstones of the firm's start. Over the years, we've added other facets. We now have a pretty really significant and robust appropriations process. We help a lot of clients just specifically on appropriations matters. We're probably in the grand scheme of DC lobbying a mid-sized firm. A little bit uniquely, we are bipartisan and we are also bicameral. And I always kind of joke that sometimes the Democrats and the Republicans get along better than the House and the Senate, former House and Senate staff do. But yeah, we're kind of a traditional government relations, or it's a fancy way of saying we're a lobbying firm.
Right. Okay. And it's interesting that you started out, because we're here to talk about energy. You started out really with an energy focus. So it's exciting to bring you into this conversation. But I want to understand just a little bit more about how the Alpine Group has been influential in the energy sector. So I want to get you to talk a little bit, if you can, about past work and what you've done. You worked on a lot of policy bills. What have you accomplished in terms of the power sector and the energy sector?
Well, I mean, I don't know what it's kind of a funny question. I don't know what I've accomplished. I mean, normally it depends on what my client's view of what they either got out of it or did get out of a particular bill. I mean, you referenced a long laundry list of bills. In the 2005 bill, I was actually in the Senate when we did that bill. 2007 on, I was in the private sector. I've had a number of clients. I mean, if you look at our client roster over the years and even today, we sort of represent sort of all facets of the energy sector, right? We have traditional oil and gas clients. We have wind and solar clients. We have oil and gas clients who do wind. We have gas utilities. We have investor-owned utility clients, pipeline clients. So we kind of do a little bit of everything, and we have done a little bit of everything over the years. I think that if you ask me to kind of go back and look at what's been significant over the years, those bills all sort of did different things. It's kind of I don't know in terms of what I would sort of point to as specific accomplishments. It's sort of hard to think of off the top of my head, but I think generally those bills. Normally, what clients are looking for is a little bit of certainty around their business and their business development, right? And I think each of those bills sort of helped in that regard.
Well, you're talking about one thing that we've talked about many times on the podcast here, which is an all of the above approach. Now, I know that in any given year or any given policy debate, you might not be advocating for all of the above, but it's interesting that the Alpine Group has clients looking for your support from across a really broad spectrum of energies. And that brings me to the next question that I wanted to ask you, Jason. I feel like we live in this incredible moment where we have so many potential solutions to our energy needs. We have everything from wind and solar and batteries to carbon capture and enhanced geothermal and new ways to do hydropower. We have uh, advanced nuclear, all kinds of advanced nuclear ideas. So right now, what is Alpine Group working on? What technologies, what policies? It's a really momentous debate that is just finishing up as we record. By the way, this is being recorded on July 2. So if something incredible happens later on this afternoon, we're not responsible. This is a momentous debate. It covers a lot of energy topics. What are you and what is the Alpine Group working on in terms of technologies and policies?
Well, so and obviously the reconciliation bill, the one big beautiful bill act as it was known until yesterday, uh, covers a lot of tax policy beyond just energy policy, and a lot of times we find ourselves working with our clients on even though we may be representing them on energy issues, there are other facets of the tax code that impact them greatly, and so we try to help them navigate that as well. It's interesting. I mean, you listed a bunch of different power sources and kind of an all of the above sort of energy approach. And if you go back to 2022 with the IRA, and then of course the conversation that's been taking place this year around what to do about the IRA in this current reconciliation bill, there are tax credits that cover everything you just described, right? Whether it's carbon capture and sequestration through 45Q, whether it's nuclear through 45U, hydrogen through 45V, wind and solar 48E and 45Y, sustainable aviation fuel and 45Z. And, we have clients that are interested in all of those, right? So I think we have found ourselves involved in all of those conversations with Capitol Hill, the House and the Senate, with the administration. And, some of those credits had less controversy around them than others. Some of those credits required a little bit more work than others. We're sort of seeing that now as the Senate passed a bill that, it made some significant changes to some of the IRA credits and less changes to some others, right? So it just kind of depended on what credit you might be talking about. But, with our client base and the diverse client base, we sort of found ourselves involved with all of those different credits and all sort of the energy sources that you referenced.
This episode is brought to you by the Natural Gas Supply Association, a DC-based trade association that represents domestic producers and marketers of natural gas. Natural gas stands out as a fuel of choice for America's energy future. It is affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Today, natural gas powers a growing share of industrial facilities, data centers, homes, and also supports the expansion of renewable energy. The benefits of natural gas rely not only on expanding our nation's energy infrastructure, like pipelines and storage facilities, but also ensuring regulatory certainty so businesses can construct and maintain this infrastructure. The Natural Gas Supply Association advocates for permitting reform to streamline the process for approving necessary infrastructure projects without compromising environmental protections. The natural gas sector has proven itself adaptable and resilient, meeting rising demand while maintaining affordability. By investing in infrastructure, embracing permitting reform, and fostering a fact-based regulatory environment, we can ensure that natural gas continues to be a reliable foundation for America's energy future. It is our responsibility to strengthen this foundation today so that we can meet the energy demands of tomorrow. Learn more by visiting www.ngsa.org.
Interesting. you may not have an answer for this, so just out of curiosity, was there any particular discussion that sticks out in your mind that during this last couple of weeks? I mean, for instance, I've read, I don't know this for a fact, but I've read that nobody seems to know where this idea for an excise tax on wind and solar came from.
Yeah.
That sticks out in my mind, but you may not know the answer to that. But is there any particular thing that sticks out?
Well, I think at the end of the day, if you look at kind of where the Senate ended up, the biggest changes, other than certain credits that I think everybody sort of intuitively knew were going to be in trouble, like the EV credit, right? I think everybody kind of knew that was always sort of at the top of the list in this political environment in terms of being in trouble. The solar,
Apparently everybody but Elon Musk, but let's not deal with that. Let's move on.
no comment. I think that the traditional PTC and ITC, the so-called renewable credits for wind and solar, more or less. I think that they were probably on the next level of getting attention in terms of changes that were made, right? And the House had sort of done a bill that rolled those back considerably and sort of tightened the constraints there. The Senate was sort of expected to loosen those up, and to the surprise of a lot of people, really didn't. You referenced the excise tax that sort of came in at the last minute and was added, and nobody sort of is owning up to sort of that being their idea, right? Which sometimes happens when something's controversial. But then, of course, it was removed over the weekend and did not end up in the final bill that the Senate passed. But
Jason, just I'll certainly interrupt you again, but do you think it's possible that excise tax idea was sort of a bargaining chip? It appeared as a bargaining chip. Okay, we'll take it out.
Well, the conspiracy theory is, yes, there is a conspiracy theory running around, and I can't say it's wrong, that people that were using 4080 and 45Y, the ITC and the PTC, were already not thrilled with what had been the changes that had been made to those credits on a few different levels. So then Friday night the text is released Friday night, and all of a sudden there's this excise tax that nobody had seen before, right? So then the focus over the weekend was, we got to get rid of the excise tax. We got to get rid of the excise tax. So then the excise tax gets removed, right? And then all of a sudden everybody forgot about the fact that they didn't love the changes that had already been made to the credit, right? So maybe it was a little bit of a Trojan horse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Last question, Jason. We try to keep these podcasts brief. Obviously, the politics around this legislation and the energy issues in it have been really intense. Mm-hmm. But you've seen, as you've said before, you've seen decades of political wrangling over energy. So I want to ask you to give us a little bit of your experience. First of all, what policy issues are next on your agenda? But beyond that, how would you compare the politics of this moment, this round of political wrangling, with the ones you've seen before? And out of that, what have you learned about working with political partisanship, divided stakeholders that can guide folks' work today?
I think it's a good question, and I think over the years, if you go back to when I was in the Senate, in the 2005 Energy Policy Act, energy policy historically, I think, was always a little bit more geographic than partisan. Mm-hmm. And over time, not unlike a lot of issues, it's become a little bit more partisan as our sort of national politics, I think, have become a little bit more partisan. The IRA in 2022 was very much a Democratic reconciliation-driven exercise. What we're seeing now is very much a Republican-driven exercise. There's still more.
I just emphasize that point, Jason. I'm sorry again, but that's an interesting point, that the IRA was passed 51-50 exactly the same way, but for the other political party as this bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, the IRA definitely emphasized sort of giving the renewable credits some certainty that they hadn't had, right? If you
Right.
go back pre-IRA, the renewable credits had sort of had a year-to-year existence, right? They would sort of live for a year and then they would expire, and then there'd be a retroactive
Yeah.
piece to it, and then they would extend it for a year, but the certainty was not there. And so what the IRA did that was particularly unique was they finally gave those credits kind of a 10-year sort of runway of certainty, right? And that was new. And some of the other credits that were considered to be a little bit more fossil fuel based struggled a little bit. And
Right.
Senator Manchin in particular, who everybody knows was in the middle of all of that, I think was able to sort of whether it was 45Q or 45V. I mean, I think he had a big hand in sort of making sure that those credits were not unfavorable to some of the fossil fuel companies that would utilize them.
Right.
And you now are dealing with a very different administration and a very different Congress who has very different priorities, and that happens. I mean,
Yep.
from somebody who was here when Bill Clinton was president to George W. Bush to Barack Obama to the first Trump administration to Joe Biden to now Donald Trump in his second administration, all of those administrations had very different approaches to energy and environmental policy. And so the pendulum swinging back and forth and has become a little bit more frequent. And it's also true with Congress, right? The Democrats will be in control for a little bit, the Republicans will be in control for a little bit, and you have in divided government. And so, you have to learn, obviously, what the priorities of each side are, and how to kind of communicate with them on behalf of your clients in terms of what they want to see, what they don't want to see. And I think at the end of the day, what you try to do is you try to make sure that you are sort of intellectually honest and that you provide them intellectual capital, right? So even if you don't agree at the end of the day over what they're doing or how you view what they're doing, you want to make sure that you have a conversation so that you kind of do what you can do to explain to them why you don't think something works, maybe, or how something might work better. And you hope at the end of the day that that message gets through.
Interesting. You have to. There's two parts to that. There's the intellectual honesty, which
Yeah.
is something I got to give a lot of respect to, and you also have to have the open listening, the ear that hears that and how it responds. But the real quick question is permitting something that you're going to be working on
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, and I was going to get to that. You asked the question, kind of what's next. I mean, permitting reform is something that I think has been a priority for a number of clients for years. And we saw this in the last couple of years, 2022, 2023, 2024, where there were, legitimate efforts to move permitting reform, led by Chairman Manchin, and the last 2 or 3 years, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, Chairman Westerman from Arkansas, House Natural Resources Committee. I mean, I think there is genuine interest across the board. Former Chairman Carper, current Chair Capito of EPW, her ranking member, Senator Whitehouse, the Chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources currently, Mike Lee from Utah, his ranking member, Senator Heinrich from New Mexico. And then there are 2 other committees on the House side, Energy and Commerce, Transportation and Infrastructure. I mean, I think there is genuine bipartisan interest in doing something on permitting reform. It is taken a long time for a reason. It's complicated and different, the parties have different priorities when it comes to permitting reform. And so, but I do think that is something that is kind of universal among clients, is trying to make the permitting process more certain and more efficient.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great place to put it. I think that's where we're going. And I think that's going to be a really interesting and in some ways a really substantive discussion. But Jason, that's all the time we have for today. I got to thank you. Jason Schendle, principal with the Alpine Group, has described his work over decades on energy issues in Capitol Hill debates and how he has learned to navigate the political wrangling. I also want to thank our sponsor, the Natural Gas Supply Association. And as always, I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.